Hello, I'm Jake Lynch, and I'm the author of Blood on the Stone, a 17th century detective novel set in the ancient university city of Oxford. And here I am in the agreeable garden of a college quadrangle. Not in Oxford, in this case, but thousands of miles away in Sydney, Australia. How come? Well, this is where I work. I'm an associate professor and I chair the Department of Peace and Conflict Studies. I teach master's students and supervise PhDs. So I divide my time between Sydney and Oxford. This is where I work. In Oxford, I run a local book group and I act in amateur dramatics, and I try to switch my periods in one or the other to catch the sunshine. Now, a little more about me. I started out as a journalist. I had a brief spell as the Sydney correspondent for the Independent newspaper, that's about 20 years ago, but spent most of my journalistic career in television. I was a political correspondent for Sky News and a reporter and presenter for the BBC. I ended up as a newsreader on BBC World Television News. And through that time, I did a great deal of reporting on various different conflicts in Southeast Europe, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and also in political conflicts in Westminster, at summit meetings and ministerial meetings and so forth. And in all that time, I developed a very strong sense that there was a missing element really to a lot of that reporting, which was the potentialities for peace. So I developed an interest in something called peace journalism, and that's my subject of my research. It's also something I've taken forward in devising and running training courses for professional editors and reporters in societies affected by violent conflict. And for that work, I was honoured in 2017 with the award of the Luxembourg Peace Prize by the Schengen Peace Foundation. So that was an apt codicil to that body of work. What are the connections with my novel? Well, in Peace and Conflict Studies, it's called a value explicit field of study. So we don't just study peace, we're in favour of peace. And one key component of peace with justice, is of course the observance of human rights. Now, you can gauge the strength of the observance of human rights quite often by checking out how far they apply to members of minorities. And that is where there may be a connection with the subject matter of my novel, because you see, England in the 17th century was a place of great upheaval. It was one of the rising factors was the so-called scientific revolution, and Oxford was a crucible of the scientific revolution, which essentially means that you can make observations through your senses of the world around you and then reach conclusions by applying your reasoning to it. That's a very democratic idea because, of course, anyone can do that. So knowledge doesn't have to be tied up in scholastic learning in monasteries. It can be available to anyone. Now, those principles were not confined to the laboratory. They seeped out into the social and political fields as well, and they're a significant underpinning for the European Enlightenment. And one of the staging posts of the European Enlightenment was the English Bill of Rights, adopted in 1689, just a few years after the events depicted in my novel. At the same time, England was a place where politics could be vicious, and members of minorities did tend to get it in the neck, notably the Roman Catholic population of the country. They were demonized as a security threat. And in 1681, at the time of the novel, King Charles II is coming to Oxford for the English Parliament, and it's a country in the grip of the so-called Popish plot, supposedly a Catholic conspiracy against the crown, which eventually turned out to be a fraud, but not before it had formed the justification for a great deal of persecution directed towards Catholics. And my hero is Luke Sandys. He's the protagonist. He's chief officer of the Oxford bailiffs, and the nearest equivalent in the period to a modern-day detective. And he himself is very interested in the scientific revolution from his days as an undergraduate some years ago. And he effectively tries to conduct his investigations on those principles of truth, evidence and justice, and he has to stand firm by them in various attempts to blow him off course as political axes are ground. In the process, he must solve the murder of a politician, he must thwart a treasonous plot, and rescue a young woman from a grisly ritualistic death. And hopefully, therefore, my novel will give you the opportunity to engage with some of those ideas in the context of an absorbing and ultimately gripping story, and have a bit of fun while you're doing it. So that's how I see those threads as being entwined. I'm very interested in how ideas link up with each other and overlap. And that, I would say, is the common thread between my journalistic career, my academic interests, and my novel. I hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to reading your reviews.